then while they were praying and sacrificing, the enemy began to rise up against them. And we talked about how often that happens in our life. We're trying to do things right. We're trying to get back on track. And it seems like the enemy just comes at us full force. Well, it's nothing new. It's something he's always done and something he'll continue to do till the Lord once again comes and takes his people out of this place. And so the enemy's rising up. And they have to go out and fight the battle, but the Lord went before them. The enemy was destroyed, turned tail and run. They recaptured a lot of their cities that the enemy had captured. And when the battle was over, Samuel went and he took a stone and he placed it on the ground and he declared the name of that stone to be Ebenezer, means stone of help. And in the process of this, as he'd done this in front of all the children of Israel, he said these words, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." And you know, I found that so interesting because it's like, that ain't much faith. That ain't really a statement of faith. And so the message last week was titled, "So Far So Good." And how so many times in our life we do the same thing without even thinking about it. Somebody asks us, "How you doing? How's it going?" Well, so far so good. Because we're tentative about what might happen next. We are excited for what has happened. We are happy for what God has done. But there's a part of us saying, but what about tomorrow? What about this situation? What about this circumstance? I don't know if he's going to do that. So far, so good. And I said, I just can't really see the man of God getting up and saying, you know, he's supposed to be the one that we follow. He was supposed to be the one that is our example. And he gets up there and says, well, so far, so good, guys. God's taking care of us so far. It's like a scary thing. And I thought, why would he do that? Why would he say that? And so the message dealt a lot with that subject, but at the end we come full circle and we found out the thus far God has helped had nothing to do with God, because God is always going to be there to help. God is always strong enough. God is always bigger than anything you're facing. The thus far was dependent on God's people. Samuel was directing it at them. Thus far God's helped you because you've been repentant. You have changed your ways. You've come underneath the wings of the Lord, and he is once again your shepherd. And so as long as you do that, like I told you earlier, God's going to be there. So thus far, God has helped. But there was another point on why Samuel done this. It was more than just that moment telling those people that God had done something amazing so far and would continue to do it based on their behavior. There was another side effect that he wanted to glean from this. This Ebenezer stone, this stone of help that was set there, was something to mark the spot. So that every time one of the nations of Israel's people, from young or old, would pass by that stone, that they would be reminded with a physical object of God's power and protection. They would come by it, and there it is, and they would remind themselves, oh, this is where God helped us defeat the Philistines, and Samuel set that up. And so today's title for the second part of this message is this: Remember When. I find it fitting when I'm seeking God for a message, and I was trying to put all this into 1 week, and I said, Lord, there's way too much information here. And he said, well, that's because I don't want you to do it all in one Sunday. I want you to do it in two. And I said, yeah, but the second Sunday's Grandparents' Sunday. I need to have something for the grandparents. We're honoring them and talking about it. And as I began to think, all of a sudden it became so obvious, Grandma, Grandpa always got some stories to tell. I mean, there ain't one alive that if you give them a few minutes and ask them a question, they will start telling you story after story. And how many times have the grandchildren sat around their feet enthralled by the stories that Grandpa probably embellished a little bit? The situation always grows every time you tell it. Phil's fish, he was telling me he went fishing yesterday. He said they caught about 20 pounds, but the one that got away, probably bigger than all 20 pounds. Tomorrow, if you ask them that story, they had 20-point-something pounds, and the one that was bigger was tipping the boat underneath the water. You know, it's going to grow. But now he's got a son that sometimes can verify or not verify those stories. But the children sit enthralled and they're hanging on every word. And there's the times that you have been around grandpa or grandma and you begin to listen to the stories. And as you grow up, sometimes it even gets to the point is, don't ask grandpa that because then we're going to hear that story. And I've heard it a bunch of times to where I can tell it back to grandpa better than grandpa can tell it to me. But you see, there's a part of their life that what is so important is remembering. You see, because life sometimes at the end of the race gets very difficult. And remembering those moments, those high points, those highlights, when things were great and amazing things happened and they overcame obstacles and they made it through tough times, are the things that help them understand they'll make it still. And they love imparting this knowledge to the grandkids because their own children have tired of hearing those stories. But since our children have had children, we got a new audience. We can reach. That's why I love it every time I see a new face walking through that door. Because my people that come all the time cannot say, you've told that story 100 times. Yeah, but they hadn't heard it. That one hasn't heard it. So remember when. Here's a little taste of what we might be thinking when we hear those words. You see, remembering is one thing, but passing it on is reliving it. Those moments come back alive. I remember growing up when I'd be around somebody and they'd be telling a story and they'd say, oh my gosh, that probably happened 20 years ago. And it's like, wow, how old are you to have memories 20 years? You know, now, I just had a birthday this last week. I turned 58. I find myself saying, 36 years ago. 36 years ago. You see, we begin to relive these things because now my son is getting married, and Amber's going to get married in November, and we begin to remember those times. You see, life takes these things away from us. The reason we have to set a memory stone is because life steals your memories, even the best of them. Because we're focused on today. How are we going to get through tomorrow? What lays ahead next week? The challenge is here, the challenge is there, and time begins to separate. It happens that way. I remember when Jordan was around and she was a baby and she's crawling and she's taking her first steps and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, all those memories of when Jeremy, my son, and Amber, my daughter, were little like that. Those memories come flooding back, the joys. And yeah, there's sometimes it wasn't so good, but they were always there. They'd never left up here. They were there. But it took something to jog a memory. Something to give it life once again. And you see, what Samuel is saying is, you need to know God's helped you thus far. But tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, 5 years from now, you're going to pass by this way again. And you need something to jog your memory. You see, because passing by this way was the obstacle of the River Jordan, in what we're going to get to in just a moment. At that time, it was a war with the Philistines. But he said, you're going to pass this way again. And you need something to stir those emotions so you relive it. That the joy you experienced overwhelms you once again. That the victory that you tasted when you thought you were at the jaws of defeat comes rising back up again. You need something to jog your memory, something to say, remember when. It's not so much for you either, it's for those that are coming after you. On this Grandparents' Day, grandparents, your job is not over. Matter of fact, I dare say it's more important now than it ever was. As so many families don't involve their children in church and religious activities and in a home of praise and worship and seeking God and Bible study, you may be the last one. You may be the one with the most influence, and definitely you're the one with the stories. You see, mom and dad's the disciplinarians right now. They don't want to listen to the authority figures in their life, but grandma and grandpa, man, they give me everything. And they'll sit at your feet and they'll listen to the stories of days gone by. If nobody shares them, the days gone by will be forever gone. Remember when this stone of help marked the spot where the enemy had been routed and God's promise to bless His repentant people had been honored. It was two things that were happening this day. I don't know about you, but I need to remember those times in my life when the enemy was routed. Not that I barely got through, but I need to be jarred by that memory so when I am going through something, that same feeling rises up. You know those moments in your life when God done something amazing. It might have been the day you were saved. It might have been the day that you got a good health report for once. It might have been the day you got a new job or promotion, or your lost loved one came back home, or they changed their ways. And the victory and the joy you felt. You see, that stone of remembrance, it encourages you the whole time you're retelling it to your loved one. Samuel knew what he was doing, how important these memories would be. And so he sets up a monument. He sets up a memorial stone so they would never forget. A stone to help remember that the Lord's help happened at this place. That the Lord had shown blessings upon them in this moment. That the Lord had proven Himself faithful at this time. Even though they had endured times of trial and hardship and hurt and fear, at this moment there was a turnaround. And everything changed. People today refer to setting up an Ebenezer. They're using something physical, and I mentioned this last week. They're using something physical to remind them of a spiritual truth. Something tangible, something we can hold on to, something we can look and see. And we remember that moment. You know, some moments get away from us. It was a few weeks back. Terry sent me a message. I was so excited that day because they had tore part of the church down. They'd started tearing up the parking lot, and they tore that carport out down there. So yeah, now on a rainy day, we don't have that, but we got people with umbrellas. They'll help get you out. But I was so excited because the process had begun. And Terry was excited, and so she shared that. And Dale messaged back. My daughter's fiance messaged her back and said something that I just totally forgot about in the excitement of what was going on. He said, yeah, that's so great, but that's the carport Pastor Steve proposed to you under. All of a sudden, that just tore my heart out. You know, I was so happy one moment and then just destroyed the next. Not for long. But you see, all of a sudden, something jogged that memory, and it stirred up, and I could remember that night. You see, Vonda remembers that night because she's the pesky older sister. And I was youth pastor at that time. How long have you been here? I've been here like for a long time. I was youth pastor back then. And we met on Saturday nights. And I was working for my dad in a painting contracting business. And I went down to Nacogdoches to the mall in Zales and got me a diamond ring to give to my woman. And I couldn't wait for Saturday night to get here so I could present it to her. And so youth group's over, everybody, hey, we're going to a pizzeria. Which pizzeria wasn't where pizzeria is now. But anyway, we're going to pizzeria. How many remember when pizzeria was in East Center? Okay, see, remember when? Pizzeria. So we all, you ain't going to pizzeria? No, I got some things I got to do. And I didn't want to spoil the surprise, you know. And so Vonda, nosy big sister, what's going on? What are you doing? What are you doing? I said, I'm proposing to Terry tonight if I can get everybody out of here. So then she starts running through the yard. Everybody get out of here. You gotta leave. You gotta just get out of here. Chased everybody out. We got it all quiet. I went out there and I'd done the one knee thing. You know, got down on that knee and, will you marry me? And you know the rest of the story. Don't need Paul Harvey to tell you. But you see, that was a precious memory, and it was stirred up with this new excitement of what was going on. But you see, if we're not careful, life steals those memories. In Joshua 4, verses 1 through 7, I'm going to read these, and it's out of the NIV. It says this, Joshua 4, 1 through 7 out of the NIV. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, you see, Samuel had a precedent. There was a reason why he set up this stone. It had happened before him. And he understood what was going on and the importance of this. And so he's following precedent and doing something that God had already showed Joshua to do. And he says this in verse 2, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each side, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. Now, there's a lot of powerful stuff in this section right here. The children of Israel, they're at the river Jordan. It's at peak stage. It's flooding. There's no way they can get across. The Lord tells Joshua to tell the priests to get the ark, and when they go and step in the waters will roll back, and that they were to get to the middle of the river Jordan and stand there the whole time everybody's passing through. Well, in this process, God tells Joshua, now where they're standing in the middle of the river, you see, in the middle of the river, you need to recognize God's still there. That in the middle of the river, it seems like you're in the worst part of the situation, but God's still there. He says, I want you to go to the middle of the river where the priests are standing, and I want you to get these men to get some stones and to take them to the place where they're going, the place they're going to find peace, the place they're going to find rest, the place they're going to find victory. I want you to take the stones from here and take them over there. There's a lot of powerful thoughts that sometimes in the midst of our trial and circumstances, we need to take a little piece of that dirt where we're going to remind us where we used to be. Now, we don't live there anymore. Verse 4. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take a stone upon his shoulder according to the numbers of the tribes of Israelites. Now, I just know because I'm a guy, this is the way guys' minds work, you know. You got these 12 guys, and Joshua said, hey, go out there to the middle and go get some stones there and get it up on your shoulder. So right there he tells me it's got to be a pretty big stone. I'm going to put it up on my shoulder. So I go out there, you know, all 12 of us, you know, and I pick up this rock, you know, I put it on, I start walking. And then all of a sudden, Johnny picks up a rock, and his is bigger than mine. Go get me a little bit bigger one. By the time that 12th guy's walking back to that place, you know, that's just guy things. The size of the rock had nothing to do with it. But in Guy's mind, you know, we get all the, I know the biggest rock in this pile. He says, go get a rock, put it on your shoulder, according to the numbers of the tribes of Israel, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, When your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them. Tell them that the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. You know, we need some grandparents. We need some parents to, instead of running from the church when an altar service is going on, and that child saying, what does that mean, for that grandparent to come and say, oh, that's where they're going to get deliverance. That's where salvation is going to come to their house. That's where that marriage is going to be restored. It's where these memories come from. That's what they're for. It wasn't a one and done. God's not a one and done God. He comes in your life and does something so that tomorrow you can lean upon that to get you through, to give you the faith to move ahead. He said, when your child says, what does that mean? What's going on there? What's happening there? Oh, you need to stir up that remembrance in your heart and in your life. And say, oh, child, you may not know, but there was a day when your grandpa, he was at the bar every Saturday night, and he got abusive, and he started doing this, and he wasn't the man you know today. You know him as sweet and loving and kind, but in those days, he could be a hateful man. He could be a hurtful man. But what you're asking about, you need to know that one day he came to this altar, and it changed him into the one he is today. That's what he's telling them to do. When your children says, what does this mean? We're living in a world. There's going to be things, you take them to a church that preaches truth, there's going to be things that the pastor says, or he better be saying, that contradicts what CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC says about what's right in this world. Why does pastor say that? And the world says this, oh, you need to have a River Jordan spot with a stone that says, because this is the truth of God, this is what delivers, this is what sets free. Good preaching. Pastor, you're talking about carrying stones. I think you're throwing them at us. No, I'm not. He said these stones are to be a memorial to the people forever. A memorial stone. Sort of like the lady. Her husband died. He only left her $20,000. After the funeral was over, she goes to her best friend and she says, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'm broke. She says, what do you mean you're broke? You told me he left you $20,000. She said, I know, but she said, I spent $10,000 on the funeral and the other $10,000 was for a memorial stone. I said, my goodness, how big of a memorial stone did you buy? About 3 carats. You're still with me. That's what I wanted to check. I'll think of them every time. These memorial stones were to serve as a basis for sharing faith with their children. We'll share our children and our grandchildren. We'll share our time. We'll share our houses, our resources, our money. We need to be sharing our faith. We need to be sharing our faith. It's the only thing they can take with them throughout this world. It's the only thing that's going to stand the test of time. In Joshua 4, where we've been reading, if we drop down to verses 21 through 23, he reminds them again. It says this, it was there at Gilgal that Joshua piled up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, in the future, your children will ask, what do these stones mean? Then you can tell them this is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until they were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we all crossed over. You see, he references the second time. I think maybe there was a little bit of a interjection there, saying, you see, God had done it at the Red Sea. If you had a memorial stone from the Red Sea when you faced the Jordan, you would have been freaking out. No big deal. I remember what he done. I'm going to relive that moment. And the God of yesterday is the God of today and the God of tomorrow. Because he says, just as he did at the Red Sea. But anyway, let's continue. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so that you might fear the Lord your God forever. 2 different times in this chapter, Joshua is understanding the importance of passing something on to the next generations. We have an obligation to pass it on to the next generation. This world is trying to get the next generation. The colleges are stealing the next generation. And in places outside of East Texas, we get comfortable in our school systems and what we're allowed to do here, but in places outside of Shelby County, they're stealing them as young as in kindergarten with their philosophies on parenthood and what parents look like, what genders they are. They're stealing them. Why? The enemy of your soul, the enemy of God Almighty, understands the power of the next generation. And if the elders, if the grandparents and the parents do not pass this on, do not recollect and remember when, we will lose this generation. But twice in this chapter, Joshua says, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Do you know that you are not unique in that your children ask a million jillion questions? Jordan is only 3. And she's already learned to get this like tone of voice. I don't know where it comes from. Used to, she'd say, if you'd say something, she'd say why, or, how come, and then of course, when they get smarter, then it goes not just why, and you explain, then it's, well, why, because why, or something like that. But now she goes, why? It's like, because I said why, that's why. That's as far as it goes. But it's always questions. They are so inquisitive. Their minds are open to everything. They want to learn so much stuff. It is the time of life that we need to be imparting the truth. And they're always asking questions. And there's a little tag at the end of some TV shows from a production company, and it came to my mind. So I turned it around, twisted it, and made it just this little obvious thing of, what does this mean? You see, you might have seen that at the end of some TV shows. It's a production company. And every time I said, why do they say that? What does that mean? But it's pointing to their logo. And so it's trying to ask a question and point out a truth that maybe you'll come back to it. But these children, Joshua said, all through life, your children and your grandchildren and other people's children, when they come across these moments in life, they're going to say, what does that mean? And since you've passed that way and since you've experienced God, you need to be the one that's able to impart that into their life. You need to be the one that can share this. Got a question for you. Are there stones in your living room? Are there stones in your living room? You see, I don't literally mean do you have a pile of stones there. But is there time of recognition of life's trials? You see, sometimes the greatest time we have to impart this knowledge is when we're sitting around fellowshipping and talking and sharing, maybe even watching a television show, especially when they're young and they don't understand things. We can share what these things mean. That if there's a time after a church service and we're driving in the car that we can explain what these things mean. Are there stones in their living room? Are there stones in your car? Is there stones on the way from your house to the church? If God has done anything for you, there should be a lot of stones in your life. You should be walking a very stony path. It's just that the stones have been pushed to the side. You see, the Holy Spirit came in and God done an amazing work and He cleared the stones out. But as you walk through life, you can point to that stone and this stone and say, I remember this time. I remember this moment. I was scared to death right here. And there's times that I remember the joy that I had. Are you walking a stony path before your children that they know all these things? There should be so many moments. Those kids should be almost bored on the way to church because every time we go to church, they're saying, hey, I remember that. I was going through Nacogdoches yesterday. We were going to go to Lufkin, but we had stopped and do a few things in Nacogdoches. And it's crazy. Most of you probably know, or a lot of you might know, where Reggae Street is, okay? Anyway, on Reggae Street, there's a lot of nice homes and all this kind of stuff. 30-something years ago, I had a boss that lived on Reggae Street. Great guy, but he had it wasn't Parkinson's, but one of those where you just get a twitch like. Yeah, Tourette's or something like that. He had that. Greatest guy, but it was just, sometimes it could be a little bit difficult to talk to him for a very length of time because he was always twisting his head and jerking his shoulder and all that kind of stuff. Wonderful guy, but every time I cross that street, every time, it's been 36 years, and every time I think of Ray Durr living down that street. And I told Terry that when we were going, I said, every time I cross the street, I think of Ray Durr living down there. She says, I do too. It's funny that I would think about that on this morning. You see, because how many places do you go by? Maybe it's at your office desk when God done something great. Maybe it's when you were a child and you went to school at Center High School and God done something great in your life. He helped you pass the test you thought you were destined to fail. Maybe God restored a marriage. Where are those places in your life? Have it gotten so far blocked and so far removed we pass those places without even remembering what God has done for us? If we can't remember what He's done for us, how are we going to tell them to our children and our grandchildren? How are they going to learn about the God who's amazing and can do all things in our lives? See, the very stones that the devil placed to trip you up should become the memorial stone on how God delivered you. We want to get that stone and chunk it so far because, man, that hurt when we stepped into that, or that blocked our path for so long. It was such a hurtful thing. Really, what Samuel's implying is, hey, no, don't throw it so far you never see it again. Place it so close that you never forget what God done right there. So that every time you go by, you sense that victory. I read a quote, and I wanted to share it with you. It said, be the memory some child needs when they grow up. You see, every one of those kids that left early this morning, from the 0s to the 11s, somebody's making an impression on them. And they're not always good. But every time they come into this house, have you ever thought about being nice to the kids of this house? Well, they're not your kids, they're not your grandkids, but they're your spiritual kids. Be friendly to them. Share things with them. Help in ministries. Be the memory. Maybe they didn't have godly grandparents. Maybe they don't have godly parents. Who's going to point out the stones? Who's going to tell them, what does this mean? Be the memory some child might need. You see, the amazing thing about that stone that Samuel placed, and even that Joshua had the 12 leaders of the 12 tribes put there, even those that don't believe it have to repeat it. Because you see, there were sojourners in the land. There were people that had been captive in that land. They weren't followers of God, but they got kids. And their kids are just as inquisitive. And they go passing by. We were walking down the river one day, and they see a pile of stones. What's that mean? Well, you see, they know it. They don't believe it. Well, that's where the children of Israel, they put that there because they said their God opened up the waters and they walked across on dry land. I don't remember. That kid still heard the story. And all of a sudden his mind begins to explore. You see, even those that don't believe your markers have to tell. Well, so-and-so's really been changed lately. What happened? I don't know. He started going up to that church on the hill. Claimed something happened at an altar one day. I don't know. I don't believe it. You see, but they still have to repeat the story. They still have to tell it. The memorial was placed so that all the people of the earth would know that the Lord alone is God. In verse 24, he said exactly this. He said, he did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful and that you might fear the Lord your God forever. So when you reference past events in your life, it's not difficult to share them. When somebody asks you your story or asks how this happened, it's easy to just let it flow because you lived it. As parents and grandparents, we need to do that. And we need to start it young. Our memorial stones serve as a testimony to share with others what God has done for us personally. I got some ladies and some men that are going to come help me do something here. And what I'm going to ask you simply to do this morning is right now, at first, if you're a grandparent in this place, as they come up and get these baskets, they're going to pass through. And they got a stone for you today. So while I'm talking, just start passing out. If you're a grandparent, we're starting off with grandparents, and then if we've got enough, then we're going to start giving them to a family unit. And then if there's some left after the service, if you want more than that, you can get one. But I want you to all, if you're a grandparent, to take a stone today. You see, Samuel was setting up a monument. He was setting up a physical thing to remind them of a spiritual truth. I explained to you this morning how easy it is to lose focus of our spiritual truths, of the spiritual things that God has done, of our past battles and victories and what's happened in our life, because life steals these memories from us. And that sometimes all it takes is something physical. So this morning, grandparents, as you take this stone, I want you to, how many have heard the expression, wow, if these walls could talk? It would be nice if all the stones in our life, those places where God delivered the miraculous and done the astounding and blew our mind with something, it'd be amazing if all we had to do, how did that happen? And the rock would just begin to tell the story. But the rock cannot tell a story, but you can. And what I challenge you to do is when you get home to take you a marker. And this is starting out small, but to take you a marker and on this stone, write a key word of something that God has done in your life. Something God has done. It might be salvation. It might be deliverance. It might be healing. It might be freedom from an addiction. It might just be coming out of a place of depression. But you write on this stone something that God has done amazing in your life. If there's a scripture, turn it over and put a scripture on it. And you put it in a place of your house which is prominent. Because you see those little ones out there? You set this on a coffee table at your house and they know everything in Grandma and Grandpa's house. And they're going to go, what is that? No, don't throw it at your brother. You might tie a ribbon on it or whatever, but the minute they pick that up, there's a good chance they're going to say, why do you have a rock in your house? You tell them what that rock means to you. Oh, because this little rock is a symbol of the big rock. The rock of Jesus Christ and what He has done in our lives. But here the challenge doesn't end. I would dare you to get a basket like they pass these out in, or maybe even a bucket. And in your alone times with God, as He begins to speak to your heart, write down some more. And from this moment on, keep that bucket, keep that box, keep that jar somewhere in your house visible. Doesn't have to be in the center of the table, but put it somewhere visible. Because then that way sometimes you'll remember, you know what? I hadn't placed nothing in that jar in a while, but my God's still been good to me. I forgot about this. And you go write it down. And sometimes when you're depressed, when you're hurting, when you don't know where to turn to, you go sit down on the floor cross-legged if you have to. You set that jar there and you begin getting out those stones of remembrance of what all He has done in your life, and see if it don't change your mental state. See if the Spirit of God doesn't come. Do we still have quite a few rocks back left there? We got a bunch of rocks. If you're a parent in this place, I want you to raise your hand, you see, because you're the next in line. Your grandparents might already be gone. They might live too far away and they don't have much contact with the kids. So you have a responsibility of passing these things on and stepping into that place. And then if the Lord tarries, your kids will grow up. And you're going to have a head start, because when they begin to have kids and you have grandkids, you've already got a jar built up of your stones of remembrance of what Jesus has done. In the New King James Version, sometimes people wonder, why are there so many different versions of the Scripture? Well, sometimes it's because it's an understanding level. Sometimes the different translations are made so people can understand them easier. Sometimes it's just put into plainer language like we might speak at any given time. But every time they change it, sometimes they add and sometimes they leave out because they're trying to get a certain meaning. I read to you from the NIV earlier, and in both of those places, it says, when your children ask, what do these stones mean? And we understand that. But in the New King James Version, it adds two words that, to me, I think were very, very important. Because you see, to the child, this rock is just a rock. It might be something to play with. It might be something to toss and juggle and do all these things. But in the New King James Version, it says, what do these mean to you? What do they mean to you, Grandma? Grandpa, why was it so important to write that on this rock? Sounds silly to me. I don't understand the importance. It must mean something to you, Grandpa. Let me tell you, son, I got a story. You love stories, don't you? Yeah, Grandpa, you know I do. Tell me a story, please. It's a small start, but it might make big changes, not only in your life or your children's or your grandchildren's, and maybe even to great-grandchildren's. In Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 12, we find another story. But I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read towards the latter part. It says this, when the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities that you didn't build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant, then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. We don't do it intentionally. We don't forget God's goodness intentionally. Hurt causes us to forget. Long trials and endurance causes us to forget. Deep sorrow and grief causes us to forget. The emergencies of life, wrecks, accidents, sickness, finances cause us to forget. But probably the greatest danger is when life is good. I have found, and I'm not picking on anybody, it's just the truth. People come to church less when life is good. I can tell some people that life's going good for them because they ain't been in church in a long time. And then also, the minute I see their face show up, there's problems. Life's gotten hard real quick, and they go to the solution. You see, that's what he's telling here. When life is good, be careful you don't forget. How are we not going to forget? We need something tangible, something to remind us. We're going to close with this video this morning. It's by Stephen Curtis Chapman. And I challenge you to watch because in this song it's titled, Remember to Remember. And there's several times that he's taking these scriptures because as he's going through life and he's experienced some things and he remembers some bad times, along the way he stops and he picks up a rock. Nothing is said about the rock, but after this morning you understand the significance. Listen to this before we close.